What began as an ordinary day quickly turned into a moment of disbelief, confusion, and public embarrassment that no one involved could have predicted. In a situation that feels ripped from the pages of a dramatic legal column, a father arrived at a house connected to his own family, expecting nothing more than a simple visit. Instead, he found himself standing on the front lawn while police officers questioned his presence, all because of one critical fact that had never been shared. The woman who lived inside the house, his son's wife, believed she was protecting her home from an intruder. What she did not realize was that the man she reported was not a stranger at all, but someone whose name was quietly tied to the property in a way that would soon change everything. From the outside, the scene looked straightforward. An older man appeared at a residential property where a young couple lived. There was no warning, no prior conversation, and no explanation offered at the door. To the woman inside, this unexpected arrival raised immediate concern. In an age where safety warnings are constant and caution is encouraged, her reaction followed what many would consider a responsible course of action. She contacted the authorities, convinced that someone without permission was attempting to access her home. Within minutes, the situation escalated from a private misunderstanding into an official police matter. As officers arrived and began asking routine questions, the tension only grew. The man, calm but clearly unsettled, insisted that he had every right to be there. To those listening, the claim sounded vague and unconvincing. After all, ownership is not assumed, it is proven. Neighbors watched quietly, unaware that they were witnessing the early moments of a revelation that would soon leave everyone stunned. The daughter-in-law, standing firm in her belief, expected the police to remove the man and restore what she believed was order and security. What made the situation especially striking was not anger or hostility, but confidence on both sides. She was confident the house belonged to her household. He was confident that the truth, once revealed, would speak for itself. The disconnect between those two beliefs was the result of a long-standing silence, a decision made years earlier to keep certain details within the family unspoken. That silence now had consequences, unfolding in front of uniformed officers and curious onlookers. As the questioning continued, a single issue remained unresolved: proof. The officers requested documentation, something concrete that could settle the matter quickly. At that moment, what had started as a call about a possible trespass began transforming into something far more complex. The daughter-in-law's certainty wavered slightly, not because she doubted herself, but because the situation was no longer as simple as it had seemed when she made the call. There was an unfamiliar seriousness in the air, the kind that signals a turning point is near. This was not just about a house or a misunderstanding. It was about assumptions made within families, about boundaries that were never clearly defined, and about how a lack of communication can turn private arrangements into public confrontations. The presence of the police stripped the issue of emotion and forced it into the realm of facts. And facts, once revealed, have a way of reshaping relationships permanently. As the moment stretched on, one reality hovered over everyone involved. Someone was about to be proven very wrong, and the truth would not arrive gently. What followed would not only resolve the immediate conflict, but also trigger a deeper reckoning, one that would echo long after the officers left and the lawn returned to silence as details slowly emerged. It became clear that the situation was rooted not in criminal intent but in a long-standing family arrangement that had never been openly discussed. The man questioned by police was not there by coincidence. Years earlier, he had purchased the property as a financial decision, intending it as a form of security for the future. When his son married, he offered the house as a place for the young couple to live, choosing not to burden them with rent and, just as importantly, choosing not to burden them with the full truth of ownership. What began as an act of generosity quietly evolved into a misunderstanding waiting to surface. From the daughter-in-law's perspective, everything about the house suggested it belonged to her and her husband. Bills were handled within the household, daily life unfolded without interference, and there had never been a reason to question the legal status of the property. Over time, the assumption solidified into certainty. The house was home, and home meant ownership. When the unexpected visit happened, her reaction was shaped entirely by that belief. She was not acting out of malice, but out of a firm conviction that she was defending what was rightfully hers. Police officers, trained to approach such disputes neutrally, focused on verifying facts rather than assigning blame. They asked routine questions, listening carefully to both sides. The man explained that he was the homeowner and that his presence required no permission. To the officers, this was a claim that demanded verification. To the daughter-in-law, it sounded impossible. The idea that such a major fact could have been withheld for so long felt almost unreal, yet the calm insistence with which the man spoke introduced doubt into what had previously seemed unquestionable. As the discussion continued, the officers requested official documentation to establish ownership. This request marked a subtle but significant shift. What had started as a report of a suspected intruder was now being treated as a property dispute with legal implications. The man, prepared for this moment, provided the necessary details. The process took time, requiring confirmation through records and identification, and during that time the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Every passing minute deepened the realization that the truth, whatever it was, would have consequences beyond the immediate situation. Neighbors who had initially assumed the police presence meant trouble began to sense that something unusual was unfolding. There was no raised voice, no resistance, only a slow unraveling of assumptions. The daughter-in-law watched as the focus of the conversation gradually shifted away from removing the man and toward understanding his connection to the property. The confidence she had felt when making the call was replaced by uncertainty, then by the uneasy awareness that a fundamental misunderstanding might be coming to light. When confirmation finally arrived, it left no room for interpretation. The records showed the man's name clearly listed as the legal owner of the house. The office's demeanor changed immediately, not dramatically, but decisively. Their role was no longer to protect the home from him, but to acknowledge his rights. The realization landed heavily. What had seemed like a simple act of caution had now become a moment of profound embarrassment and shock. For the daughter-in-law, the confirmation was more than surprising, it was destabilizing. It challenged years of belief and raised uncomfortable questions about why such an important truth had never been shared. For the man, the moment was bittersweet. His claim had been validated, but at the cost of a public confrontation and the visible strain it placed on family relationships. The officers, having resolved the legal question, could only observe as the human impact of the revelation began to surface. This incident underscored how easily private agreements can collapse when they rely on silence rather than clarity. The lack of communication had transformed a family matter into a legal one, played out in front of authorities who had no stake in the emotions involved. What remained was a clear legal fact and a complicated personal aftermath, one that would not be resolved as quickly or as cleanly as the police report itself. Once the officers concluded their involvement and the immediate legal confusion was resolved, the deeper consequences of the incident began to surface. The police presence had ended, but the emotional weight of what had happened lingered heavily over everyone involved. What could have been a private conversation between family members had instead unfolded in a public, official setting, leaving little room to ignore the damage done. The truth was now undeniable, and with it came a wave of uncomfortable reflection. The daughter-in-law was left grappling with a mix of embarrassment, shock, and confusion. Her actions, which had seemed reasonable only hours earlier, now felt painfully misdirected. She had not intended to challenge authority or insult a family member. She had acted on what she believed to be fact. Realizing that the foundation of that belief was incorrect forced her to confront not just the misunderstanding, but the implications of how easily assumptions can shape behavior. The awareness that neighbors and police officers had witnessed the moment only intensified the sense of humiliation. For the father, the situation stirred equally complex emotions. On one hand, his ownership had been formally acknowledged, restoring his sense of legitimacy and control. On the other, the public nature of the encounter revealed a fracture in trust that he could no longer ignore. His decision to withhold information, initially made out of generosity and a desire to avoid complications, now appeared flawed. What he had viewed as a harmless omission had contributed directly to a conflict that strained family bonds and exposed private matters to public scrutiny. The son, caught between the two, faced perhaps the most difficult reckoning. The incident forced him to recognize the consequences of silence within a family structure. By not clarifying the living arrangement, he had unintentionally allowed assumptions to grow unchecked. Now, he had to navigate the emotional fallout, balancing loyalty, responsibility, and the need for honesty. The event served as a stark reminder that avoiding difficult conversations often leads to far more difficult outcomes later. In the days that followed, conversations replaced confrontation. The family was compelled to address questions that had long been ignored. Why had ownership never been disclosed? What expectations, if any, came with living in a house provided by a parent? And how should boundaries be defined going forward? These discussions were not easy, but they were necessary. The incident had removed any possibility of continuing as before. Transparency was no longer optional. Beyond the immediate family, the story resonated with a wider audience once it began circulating. Many saw in it a reflection of common issues, unspoken agreements, blurred boundaries, and the assumption that kindness does not require clarity. Reactions varied, with some sympathizing with the daughter-in-law's instinct to protect her home, and others questioning the wisdom of keeping such a significant fact hidden. The situation sparked debate about responsibility, communication, and the fine line between generosity and control. Ultimately, the incident became a lesson rather than just a conflict. It demonstrated how quickly misunderstandings can escalate when assumptions replace facts. It also highlighted the importance of clear communication, especially when legal and personal matters intersect. A house, after all, is not just a physical structure, it represents security, autonomy, and trust. When those elements are compromised, the impact reaches far beyond property lines. What remained after the tension faded was a choice. The family could allow the incident to define their relationships through resentment and blame, or they could use it as a turning point toward honesty and mutual respect. While the legal question had been answered decisively, the emotional resolution would take time. The silence that once seemed convenient had been broken, and in its place stood the difficult but necessary work of rebuilding understanding.